For those of you I haven't met, I'm Jennifer Borman, Commonwealth's head of school, as well as a grateful graduate of Commonwealth, class of 1981. 1981 is the year our founder, Charles Merrill, stepped down as headmaster, and we gather at tonight's Merrill Series to celebrate his commitment to engaging with complex, consequential ideas. Welcome to you. Welcome to all of you on Zoom. And thank you so much for coming this evening. And a profound thanks to our panel, two of whom have traveled a good ways. Hamid from Kendall Square. Still, thank you. Additional thanks to my colleagues who've worked really, really hard to organize tonight's event. Among us are alumni from every era of Commonwealth's history, and we represent as well the successive unspooling of various technologies. There are those among us who wrote their Commonwealth papers on manual typewriters, those who used the first calculators in math class. In my own era, we had a very small computer club, I think maybe like 4 extremely niche and proudly nerdy students. But subsequently, obviously, in our world, we've seen the rollout of personal computers, word processing, the internet, the web, cell phones, smartphones, and a truly dizzying array of apps and software that now weave their way, sometimes perniciously, into our daily lives. I would say that although we have encountered and integrated so many new technology during our school's history, artificial intelligence strikes me as qualitatively distinct. And tonight, we'll begin to tease that out. At Commonwealth currently, we're asking ourselves all kinds of questions about how AI might impact our students' education. How might we use it to enhance their skills and our pedagogy? And conversely, how many students will hear the siren song of a quick shortcut and use AI to gradually de-skill themselves? And what does that look like at scale? Though we don't have answers yet, we are greeting AI with our usual bedrock commitment to curiosity, and we're eager to dive in and assess both the near-term and longer-term possibilities and dangers. And tonight, I know, will provoke our collective curiosity. To get us started, I'm thrilled to introduce our moderator, who will then introduce you to our panelists. We had hoped to have alum Jen Bluestein join us to moderate. She got ill this morning, but we are lucky instead that Catherine Brewster gamely agreed to step in. If you were a Commonwealth student anytime after 1999, you may have had the privilege of taking English with Catherine. She has masterfully taught our students the care and technique required to translate our thoughts into clear, crisp, artful prose. She has also asked her students to critique and analyze AI-generated prose and is herself interested in the promise and pitfalls of these new technologies. With great excitement and gratitude, I turn it over to Catherine Brewster.
So yes, I'm an English teacher. I did not come up with these questions between 7th period and now. They are the work of Jen Bluestein. I want to make sure nobody thinks that I know more than we would never do that. So to introduce our panel, right next to me is Dr. Duncan Eddy, class of 2009, who's a researcher and engineer. He focuses on combining classical theory, modern software engineering, and emerging AI and decision-making techniques to build safe, reliable, automated systems. He's now the executive director of the Stanford Center for AI Safety, and his research focuses on the application of reinforcement learning to find failure modes in autonomous vehicles and generative AI models. Previously, Duncan founded and led the Spacecraft Operations Group, at Capella Space, which I think is what we told our students about this morning. The first commercial radar Earth imaging satellite constellation, and the Constellation Management and Space Safety Group at Amazon Project Kuiper. Next on my left is Hamid Rahman, class of 2013, who is a software engineer at Google. After he graduated from Swarthmore College in 2017, Hamid joined Google as an engineering resident, rotated through 2 ML teams, including one focused on keyword detection for Google Assistant. He then joined the travel ads team and hasn't left. He really loves his coworker. He's led many projects and worn many hats at the company, including reviewing launches across Google to ensure they meet end user privacy standards. Outside of work, Hamid spends a lot of time organizing, both with the Alphabet Workers Union and grassroots campaigns, and helps run Youth Ultimate Frisbee programs in Boston. And finally, Rebecca Wright, class of 84, who is the Druckenmiller Professor of Computer Science and the founding chair of the Computer Science Department at Barnard and the faculty director of the Vagelos Computational Science Center at Barnard. Her research is in the area of privacy and security, as well as computer science education. Dr. Wright serves as an editor of the International Journal of Information and Computer Security and of the Transactions on Data Privacy. She's a member of the board of the Computing Research Association's Committee on Widening Participation in Computing Research. She earned a PhD in computer science from Yale and a BA from Columbia and an honorary ME from the Stevens Institute of Technology. She's a fellow of the IEEE and a distinguished member of the ACM. So we'll get started by laying the table in the following way. First of all, and I'm going to I'll just pass the mic down the table, and maybe we'll go in a different order each time. Let's characterize risk. How would each of you describe the risks of increased AI? And are there areas of risk you think are misunderstood or overblown? How would you characterize individual versus societal risk?
That's a very good one, and tough to answer in a reasonable amount of time. The things that I would say concern me the most are what Jennifer alluded to in terms of education. So in terms of dumbing down of skills, especially for students who, when you're still trying to learn those muscles of how to think critically and work through hard problems where there aren't answers. Tools like ChatGPT are super useful for when you're trying to look up information instead of doing an internet search. They'll answer questions pretty quickly, and that can be very helpful for someone who already knows what they're looking for and can also assess like when they're right or wrong or hallucinating. The rest for educating young students is something that I think is pretty concerning. In terms of overblown, I'd say autonomous vehicles are actually pretty safe by and large. Like if you have ever been to San Francisco or Phoenix, drive in a Waymo. They're pretty cool. They're excellent if you're a biker. Like they will stop. Other cars might not. And so as like you can debate different driving systems. I wouldn't ever drive in a Tesla, but most of the systems where they treat safety rigorously are much better than human drivers per mile driven, which is something to be excited for.
Yeah, I'll build off of the points that Duncan started us on, also because this is a very broad topic, and I'm sure we could just keep talking about it for days and we still haven't covered everything. I think when I think about the question about societal risk, the reason I think risk is hard to classify is because it really depends on the application of AI. It's not like AI itself is good or evil, but the tools that we create that use this technology and the reasons we're using that technology, that's where I see the main risks. So, for example, when I see a government that is very openly gearing up for war with China, and I see work that my coworkers are doing that are more and more being used for military purposes, that scares me. And so I think fundamentally for me, like just at the very surface level, it's about the incentives we're putting in place that lead to the development and the research and what kind of tools we're building at the end of it. The education point I really agree with, and it's interesting because that note about de-skilling, actually, like, we can blow that up and look at how that affects us at a societal level too, where a lot of jobs actually can get automated using AI. I think I was reading somewhere that said, like, the IMF estimated that 60% of jobs in the US were susceptible to automation as a result of AI, and half of that, so like around 30%, could be fully automated. And so when we talk about that, the setup that we have today, it's not that, oh, great, if you're a worker, you'll get to maybe work like a little less hard and still be able to produce the same. Instead, the orientation is very much around the folks that are like the executives of companies and that circle where it's they're the ones that are going to mainly profit off of this type of technology and use it as a way to cut costs at the end of the day. I don't want to get too political here, but I think that the TLDR is when these technologies are being developed for the purpose of profit and power rather than for the purpose of doing social good, that's the part that scares me, and that's where I see the most risk.
Adding to those points, which I definitely agree with, I think another risk is, or really sort of a theme of many of these risks, is that it gets harder and harder to tell over time when you're interacting with a person and when you're interacting with a machine, and even sort of the line between sort of what was created by people versus by machines becomes increasingly unclear as, you know, at some point in the process of coming up with a decision or an outcome, there may have been AI assisting in that process. And so I think there's risks, you know, there's needs to be able to assess information and understand what might be hallucination or a biased decision. There's also need to sort of make sure we maintain human creativity and human connection, and the pull of these technologies often goes in the opposite direction, partly because it's designed to increase usage and engagement. And I think this is both driven by profit motives, but also can be harnessed by malicious actors to try and influence people and influence decisions. Increase, like, I think the risk is it can be done very well, it can be done at scale, it can be done in ways that are very hard to detect and understand. On the flip side, I think some of the excitement I have around AI is its ability to help advance scientific discoveries and other kinds of discoveries. I think it can help humans to unleash even more creative potential and explore areas you know, that they might not have thought to go in. So I think there is lots of room for excitement, but definitely a lot of concern. And then some of the other concerns that I think we'll get to later are around sort of the data needs and the energy needs to build good AI models. And again, when only sort of near-term profit motives are in play, those issues can get overlooked.
Hold on to the mic. Let me start the next one, which is, you can't talk about risks without benefits. What do you see as the greatest benefits of AI now and in 5 years?
So already alluded some to what I see as those benefits. You know, already with this year's Nobel Prizes, we saw AI as a powerful factor in helping to contribute to those advances. I think advances in medicine, detection of you know, images, detection of, you know, malignant tissue and images, drug discovery. All of these are areas that can really benefit and are already have been benefiting today from AI. I think there's the quality of lots of AI assistants of various kinds have gotten good enough that they're useful to our everyday lives. I think there's both unclear definitions of what AGI, artificial general intelligence, would even mean, and different guesses as to when it might or might not be achieved. I think that opens sort of a whole nother set of risks and benefits that are harder to know what they are. But I definitely think we will see increasingly ways that AI is just in the fabric of our everyday lives, just like other computing technologies have been. And the potential for it to exacerbate existing biases, disparities, and all of that, I think, again, it sort of just scales up a lot of things that we already see. But I think if done well and carefully, and probably with some luck as well, it does have the potential to, so the utopian view would be it will do all the boring work and we, the people, get to do the fun things. Not particularly optimistic that it'll go completely that way, but I think there are elements of that I do think we will capture in some way.
Yeah, I think how you framed it at the end, Rebecca, really also captures it for me, where there's a lot of potential for AI-based technologies to really relieve us from things that we find burdensome. An example is let's say a worker at UPS, you're loading in packages in trucks day and night. But if you have trucks that can drive themselves and robot arms that can help deliver the packages, then you could say during particularly hot days, workers don't need to come in. Going back to the risk point, that can be taken to the extreme where you say, yep, let's get rid of all of the workers. It's all automated, and good luck finding another job. But there's a tremendous potential to do a lot of good and relieve burden. A fun anecdote I'll share is, personally, I've really been enjoying a little AI tool that we have internally on our code editors that will actually very accurately pick out the little snippets of code I want to write and then let me tab complete it. And it's incredibly nice because I don't have to just go rote things on repeat. I'm I've written a for loop so many times, I don't need to write another one. But it knows which one I want to write. And every now and then it gets it wrong. But it's that kind of tool is enjoyable to work with.
Yeah. You've already mentioned a bunch of really good things, so I'll touch on a few of them and try to add some new things. So, I mean, medicine is a huge one. Access to healthcare, especially as doctors become harder to come by in underprivileged areas and otherwise, skin cancer detection is a huge one. That is now kind of a solved problem off of images. You can detect cancer just off of images, off of your cell phone. There are a bunch of other diseases you can do it. There, mind you, while that's also a risk of, do you do it right with unbiased to population groups, population subgroups, and there are other problems, you can also get healthcare to people that previously could not have it before. Autonomous vehicles is a large one. I mean, people are terrible drivers by and large. Go outside. And it can be a lot safer. And the data is already out on that one of autonomous vehicles that are well made are safer than human drivers per mile driven, by 2 orders of magnitude, I think, in terms of accidents. Really, aircraft are already heavily automated in terms of most of flight. And aircraft travel is one of the safest ways to travel by and large, pending recent events. So those are a lot of the recent advances. Writing code is fantastic. In terms of 5 years, for what you asked for the benefit in 5 years, I think that's going to be very, very hard to say because there have been predictions over the last few years of this will never happen. This will never be a solved problem in terms of image detection, in terms of language, realistic language generation, in terms of image generation. And year after year, those milestones are falling. There are a number of challenges for, are we going to get to general intelligence? And that's really hard to say, I would say. I am in the skeptic camp on that because I think a lot of the technology is kind of a local minimum in terms of how it is made. And it is very easy for companies to try to scale their capabilities by getting more data and throwing more compute at it, which leads to not wanting to change the paradigm. And so there is a large chance that we don't see anything really change in terms of capabilities of new systems that are wildly different. They just get incrementally better, still incredibly impressive, but nothing to like, we're not going to be going to the moon anytime soon on our flying cars.
Can you start this one? Environmental risk. The energy consumption required to train models. How do we make AI more sustainable? And if we can't, how do we add that to our assessment of risk?
So this is a challenging one because there is, and we've already seen innovations in terms of making these models more efficient, where they use significantly less compute to do the same to have the same capabilities of previous models. This is actually largely driven out of the US withholding GPUs from China. And so countries, which is a whole different topic in terms of risk and non-proliferation. But because we have withheld that technology, they have invested very heavily in making more efficient models, which have brought down the cost of both training as well as inference by orders of magnitude. Now, what a lot of that turns into is now we've brought the cost down by 2 orders of magnitude, so we can do 2 orders of magnitude more inference to get better results. So you're back still at the same place. Whether that wins in the long run, very hard to say. In terms of, there is, I would say, hope, though, in terms of AI helping solve other very challenging problems, in terms of fuel generation, in terms of green energy technology. There's actually a lot of really good work on using AI for mineral discovery for fueling green energy transition, which is normally a really hard problem. And there's a company, Cobalt Metals, that has recently found some massive cobalt copper deposits, like pretty much more sustainably in terms of reducing drilling, as well as figuring out where these are at all to help supply the needed minerals for green energy transition. So those are some of the benefits.
Yeah, I think Duncan captured a lot of the general views I have on this too. As Duncan referred, there's the DeepSeek R1 model that can be produced with, like, what is it, 1/10 the cost of the same models that roughly performant, not as, but roughly performant with the same types of models that a lot of the big tech companies that we've all heard of are producing. And that came out of necessity because we wanted to stop giving them the state-of-the-art NVIDIA GPUs, and they had to figure something out. So I think the silver lining there is there's actually like a lot of room for innovation in reducing the footprint here. But I was reading something the other day that said something like between every tens of questions that ChatGPT answers, it's consuming like a 16 fluid ounce bottle of water, right? And then think of everybody that's using this and just how much we're going through. And then it's not just the data centers, but we're having to think about how do you rewire the energy grid to be able to support all this. I was reading something else that was saying like by 2030, 16% of the US energy grid will be oriented towards powering these data centers purely for keeping up with the model training. That's a lot of power. Like the 16% of our entire energy grid. And then there's things like chipset manufacturing that also has an impact. So it's a pretty big and hefty footprint. And we have a long way to go to try to make it sustainable. And I think this alludes a little bit to what I was saying when I kicked off, which is we need the incentives and the structures and the organization in place to actually push that. If we just allow for like totally unfettered spending, billions to keep innovating, not worrying about the environmental cost, I don't think it's reasonable to then expect a different outcome.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a really tough problem. I think it is a place where probably legislation is going to be needed and perhaps international cooperation to, if there's any hope of capping in some ways the energy usage. I do think innovation, there's a lot of room for innovation there. Something that that we've been doing, some of my colleagues at Barnard have been doing in Columbia on a sort of more local scale, for two reasons, is thinking about small language models and the power of small language models. So both looking at models that are targeted towards particular tasks or languages, in particular things like low resource languages where there's not a lot of material out there in the world, and still trying to do, create models that are good for those languages. And so those ideas can potentially carry over or for very specialized tasks. The other reason we've been looking at them is thinking about educating our computer science students. We want them to be able to really experiment and explore with these technologies, but we don't have the resources or the desire to use the resources in the way to have them, doing incredibly intensive compute. And so thinking about ways to create meaningful work and learning and outcomes on a much smaller scale, there's a lot of incentive within the educational space to do that. Maybe some of those innovations are things that could be useful in other ways as well.
I think I'll move to letting you guys sort out among yourselves who wants to jump on a particular question. The next one being, Commonwealth is full of writers and artists still. So lawsuits have been filed against AI companies by everyone from the New York Times to some of the biggest publishing houses, alleging copyright violations and other transgressions in how AI has used intellectual property without consent to train the models. How will AI impact the creative and intellectual space? Corollary, is there any way AI will enhance creative space for the work of scholars, writers, and others?
I'll kick this one off. One of the things I think about when I think of how AI affects writers and artists is actually, and I want to end this with like a message of hope here. I look at what happened with the Writers Guild of America and the Screen Actors Guild in the past couple of years, and I'm sure y'all saw the massive strikes, and one of the outcomes with the CBAs that they came out with for that was protections for writers on when AI can be used to generate scripts. When can someone in management force a writer to use AI to generate their product versus it be the choice of the writer? When can we use the likeness of someone for theatrical purposes? So for example, like if you're like a background actor and they have your photo, can they then create a image of you that can then say some lines, and then now they don't have to pay you at all, right? Like they just have, they own your likeness. And they were able to win a lot of protections. And I think the reason that gives me hope is we see that, even though the natural incentives are not oriented in that direction, people do care and pay attention. And when everybody gets organized and they fight back and like demand for fair rights, they're winning them. Granted, this is not a thing that we're not winning on all fronts. Many other fights to wage, but that gives me hope that ultimately, like, we can drive towards a society that puts things like giving credit and rights to the people producing the art and the writing over just generically taking their products and then synthesizing new things and saying, yep, like this is now owned by some corporation or studio or whatnot.
Yeah, I mean, I think again, sort of in the positive direction, I think if we as a society can, put value on human creativity, then with sort of the right policies and norms in place, that can be protected and can potentially be enhanced. So artists and writers can, sort of make use of AI as a tool to help them do more, imagine more, create more, explore more, do things more quickly. But I think it's a real concern, and especially in this sort of context of an educational institution, making sure we lay the groundwork for budding artists, budding writers, budding anything to still explore and value ways of being and producing and thinking that don't rely on those tools. Just like we still teach people to add, even though we have calculators. On the other hand, we don't teach them how to use slide rules. We let them use calculators. And so, deciding where we think something is useful and valuable in and of itself, and where there are, maybe there's some skills we're willing to let go. And so I do think sort of how AI is handled in the education system is going to have a really substantial impact on how it's used in the future.
I'll take this in a slightly different direction. I think originality is going to have more and more value for two reasons. One is we're running out of training data, and from the cynical way of looking at it, you need more original training data. AI is really good at interpolating, so figuring out, copying more of what it's seen before. It's not good about coming up with new things. And so actually having that originality to come up with new things is going to be even more valuable. On the other side of it, when it is trivial to produce mass-generated writing, what do you want to see? Do you want to see another AI produced movie? No, I actually want to see something that like someone put some thought into and has originality to it. I think we'll actually likely see a pushback more and more of seeing that value, and seeing people value that more is my both thought and hope. The one other thing is we have seen companies also respond. So Adobe has had a very successful trained on data that they own image generation tool. They're not doing it out of the good of their hearts, of course. They're making a lot of money because they have gone out and sourced and bought the licensing to buy all of the data to do the training. But they're seeing, again, a great response of making it a useful tool for artists, because it's a tool catered to artists. It's taking, okay, you need to produce all of this like standard copy art. Well, okay, I'll just have the tool do like 50 more of the same thing because that's what it's asked for. And when that used to take a week, I can actually go on and work on more original things, which is one of the benefits of this. I'd be curious for your take, Ms. Brewster.
I don't write anything except. So taking a step back from this 20,000-foot level, on an everyday, like regular person level, how should we think about AI in our own lives? Should we be concerned with privacy? How about potentially less attention from humans? This makes me think maybe you should start in moments when we expect that, like medical and health insurance industries, or the environmental concern, or concern about impact on employment pathways. If I'm in 11th grade at Commonwealth, what are the jobs that won't exist when I graduate from college?
Yeah, I think we should be concerned. I think there are real concerns, and making sure we're talking about it and thinking about it and educating, future technologists and decision makers and politicians and artists and everyone else to be aware. I think privacy is a substantial concern. I think it was a concern before AI models were gobbling up data, because data was useful for other things, and it's just exacerbated the problem. I think for me, coming back to what I was saying at the beginning, though, I also think, a big concern is sort of this spiraling of not even being able to tell or not even trying to tell, am I interacting with a person or a machine or data, machine generated content, because that line is blurred, and then just everything gets worse. The quality of results get worse. Then machines are being trained on machine generated data because they can't tell what was what. And so I think there is the real potential for sort of all of our experiences to ultimately sort of be more uniform and degraded. I lost track of the specific question.
An English teacher do.
What should an English teacher do? I mean, okay, good. So what should an English teacher do? So you should definitely do everything you've always done, especially at a place like Commonwealth, at a place like a liberal arts institution like Barnard, right? You're thinking about words as communication, you're thinking about words as creativity or writing as creativity, you're thinking about it as a way to understand the human experience and to create beauty and to explore all kinds of different ways to do that, or to to ways to not just beauty, but like to look at the ugly stuff too. So and I think my thinking as an educator in the computer science space is we still, when teaching, you want to focus on those basic elements, and then also you want to understand you are creating, the people who, like, you're not creating, you're training and helping build people who are going to live in this world where these tools exist. And so you don't only want to not use them, right? You want to engage with them. So things like having the students critique, ChatGPT generated text and things like that to understand where it's really good, surprisingly good, where it falls, and why it matters, or maybe they decide it doesn't matter. Let them explore these things, and always one has to walk the line between sort of basic education and teaching people how to think and how to learn, and employability and being able to make a living. But I think one is a prerequisite, really for the other. Maybe not completely, but like I think I believe we will always live in a world where human critical thinking and problem solving will be valuable, even if certain forms of work that we currently do for money become not jobs and are done by someone else.
Yeah, I think that through line of critical thinking, that's always going to be like at the core of a lot of the things that we do, that we as humans are going to be motivated by, be attracted to. Like, do we want to see an AI generated movie, or do we want to see something that actually is like beautiful? No shade on AI. Actually, yes, shade on AI. Yeah, I think I really resonate with that. And as I think about like how I think about my own life relative to AI, I think there's like different dimensions that Catherine, you touched on in your framing of the question. So in terms of like concerns around privacy, these models are ingesting data from pretty much the entire internet, and it's not necessarily always done in a way where we let you know, like, hey, like we're consuming, we're going to pull all these things and then turn them into data sets for then model training. One of the big initiatives that I've had the pleasure of working on is actually like small things, like when you do a search and then on Google, let's say, and then you get some results, having like a small like button to the side that's like a tiny question mark, and you can hover over it, and then it's been watered down now, unfortunately, but at some point for a couple of years, it used to tell you a lot more fine grained, like, how did we actually come up with the results of this page? Like, we looked at this thing, and this thing, and then you had a preference for that, we think. And so that's why we're showing you this. There's a lot more room for transparency with end users in terms of, not end users of the AI model, just the different internet platforms, in terms of telling them like what exactly is getting collected, how do you control for that, what happens if you toggle this on and toggle that off. And then there's another interesting question there too, in terms of, we run into this at work all the time, which is, we have things known as like production roles. So like, they're not any one person, it's like a machine, and a machine is then reading the data. So if a machine is reading the data and no human is interacting with it, is that machine then allowed to kind of go anywhere? There's these like interesting questions that we run into. So like in the case of like, let's say like healthcare data, maybe ultimately it gets funneled into a report that only your doctor sees, but then it's a generic machine role that is able to see like everybody's data everywhere, and maybe no human can actually like slice into it and pull someone's individual records. Like, is that okay? Should you be able to control when that doesn't happen? These are like all like questions that I think about. In terms of employment, the thing I was mentioning about descaling of labor that we think we've all touched on. One of the things I was reading about was, for UPS, there's the network of the future, where they're trying to automate a lot of the hubs that they have, and automate a lot of both the assortment of mail, but then also the delivery of mail. And so let's say like someone is going to look for a job. We're going to have to be able to find like different modes of like employment, and it can't just be rote things like, well, yeah, your job is to look at the output of the AI and make sure that output is good. That not only is that not an attractive job, but then we actually become servants of the AI models that we're generating in that scenario. Not trying to say service from like a AI singularity thing. That's definitely like a way to distract us from the real problems, I think. But and then, you know, we've touched on environment, climate change. Like, here's a very real impact of climate change for me. Like, I coach Ultimate Frisbee. Over the past couple of years, I've had to help come up with policies around looking at the air quality index and when is it valid and not valid to hold practices. And I reached, what did I do? I looked at California standards, because they unfortunately have had much more experience with dealing with fires and smoke everywhere. And so like, I see these big data centers and just like totally unfettered expansion without really like critical thought around the environmental impact. And I think about like, well, like that's also impacting me on a very regular basis too. That the societal becomes the individual. But yeah, the caveat here that I'd like to offer also is like this is disruptive technology, and disruptive technology, like it's in the name of it, like it's disruptive, but there are ways that we can try to, I think, be a little more cautious and try to catch up a little bit with the technology that's out there in terms of thinking about how do we use it in like a fair way, in an ethical way. That's a rambling of thoughts to touch on this question. But I want to connect it back to what Rebecca was saying with like that's through line of like the critical thinking part doesn't go away. And in fact, it becomes, to Duncan's point, like even more attractive. And that and the fact that like people are starting to figure out ways to like make these types of innovations better for people at large, like that gives me a lot of hope.
I will try to be brief, but to answer the very early point of like, when are these systems dangerous in not just AI, but when automating any system, the most dangerous point is when you have partial control to an automation system and people are asked to correct it or save it from failing. And like, that does not work. When you're like, pay attention when it's important and really dangerous is just a recipe for failure incredibly consistently. And so with these systems, like, they can perform better than humans for a lot of things, which is great. They need to be able to be at that point where it's consistent. On the other side, for what should the English teacher do? The unfortunate answer is I think you need to lean into it, and everyone needs to. There was a point I heard recently of like someone that I really appreciated from a researcher, Nicholas Carlini, DeepMind, and he was saying like, this is almost like, one way to think of it is it's a new Google. When Google comes out, like, we all know how to search things in Google now, and it isn't actually really quite English. You put in specific terms and words, and like, you know how to kind of feed Google to get what you want. To a certain extent, I think we're all going to need to learn how to feed these systems to get what you want out of them in the right way. And there are useful applications. I mean, how many times do you write software and skip writing tests for it? I have definitely never ever done that, but it's now really easy with like AI to just hit tab, tab, tab and get the tests you want. So like, there are distinct benefits. They're also great at planning vacations.
I think you have all, in your own way, answered one of the next questions, which is, what can Commonwealth do to be a place that still matters and is not an anachronism? And I put that on the table because I do think you have been talking about it, but I want to make sure we leave room for people to ask questions. So I'm going to go to the last of the questions that Jen framed, which is what steps you would support to minimize risk and maximize value, which is broad, particularly given that the technology is changing every 2 seconds. But would you address what role you think government has, and what roles corporations have, and what individuals can do to minimize risk and maximize value?
I'll go briefly on this one. But so government has an important role in regulation. At the same time, there is definite risk of government overreach. And we've seen that in like California SB 1047, 1048, where essentially they published a bill that was essentially like, if you have a model above this size, you need to do a ton of compliance. And if you're right under that threshold, which pretty much everyone started doing immediately, you don't need to do any of the compliance. And there's a bunch of like, added a lot of barriers to entry that would stifle innovation in terms of saying you need to do a ton of compliance. So essentially like, only Google and OpenAI, and like, if you have like $1 trillion in the bank, you can do this. If you don't, like, get lost. So that is government going too far. I think there's also good examples of legislation, like so Europe's AI safety framework goes potentially a little heavy-handed in places, but they have a really nice way of thinking about it. It's an application-based risk assessment where they grade applications from extreme risk to low risk. And if it's a low risk, like, go ahead, do what you want. And if an extreme risk, you are not allowed. And like, one of those I think is a great example is just like hiring systems. AI is like, will overfit on personal characteristics and slight differences, and it will be biased, and like, just don't use AI in hiring. I think that's a pretty like straightforward one. Yeah, I'll leave there.
Yeah, I think we've all touched on this a lot, so I'll also try to be brief if I can. I think probably one thing that has come through in the responses, and also, mentioned in the background too, is I'm trained to think like an organizer and an activist. And I think at the end of the day, it goes back to this point I was saying earlier about what are the incentives that we're putting forward. Like, for example, like with the role of like government, like, yeah, like we definitely need a lot more regulation, but then what is that regulation ultimately being built for? Like, what is the end goal? Is it for US supremacy? Then actually that's bad. I think. So I think I might be overreaching here, but I think a fundamental truth that I believe in is that most people want to live a life of peace, dignity, and happiness. And at the end of the day, like it's this issue about AI, I think, is actually like sort of an instance of maybe much broader issues we are seeing in our society today. And the best solution that I've come up with so far is get organized with the people around me to be able to, like, when things go bad, be able to fight back.
So one of the things I focus on a lot with my students in computer science and that we focus on in our curriculum in computer science at Barnard is sort of twofold. One is that these are technologies that are designed and they can be designed differently. They're large and complex, so you don't always know in advance when you design something sort of what the outcomes and implications are going to be, but you can always do things differently. And the more you understand how to create and manipulate the underlying tools and the fundamentals of those methods, sort of the more you have a chance to help create them differently. Also, though, that sort of every stage of development and use and deployment, there are decisions that can be made and that can be made differently. And so sort of to incorporate a sense of ethics and responsibility and accountability that extends, from the low-level developers to the designers of the systems, to the decision makers, sort of the technical decision makers, to the deployers, and sort of the more managerial decision makers, to policy makers, and so understanding that there's a through line there, and that you can't just assume sort of the ethics will be added later, right? This needs to be incorporated sort of from the beginning. And so that's something I think about in the context of computer science education, or educating people around computer science, whether they are going to be computer scientists or not. But I think it's really pretty broadly applicable.
Anyone in Zoom land have a question?
We do have a few questions from Zoom. We can start with David Gleason, who many of you may know. I'm going to just read exactly what he wrote here. Thank you, David. He says, sadly, the liberal enterprise is currently being fundamentally undermined. There will be no federal controls, education, or regulation on AI. Instead, we must define and declare the value we place on life over tech, creativity over regurgitation. How do we set the stage for good decisions not corrupted by self-interest? Barring that, the profit motive will prevail.
Hey, you to me.
That is Commonwealth. Thank you, David.
I mean, I'll kick off. I think this has been my message this entire time. We need to get organized, and if it's not clear what I mean by that, I'll give a more concrete example. One of the things I'm deeply involved with at work is building the Alphabet Workers Union. And one of the things that stands out to me is most other coworkers, when I talk to them, they actually don't want their work being used for military purposes. I've had multiple coworkers work on projects that ultimately get funneled into like a package as part of a defense contract and then be used for military technology. And if any one individual engineer says, no, I don't want to do this, it's very unlikely that that project will change direction. However, like, we have lots of evidence now to see things like, for example, Google had a DOD contract that the entire engineering org that was working on it walked out and refused to work on it, and then they had to cancel it because you can't just keep 60 engineers, paying them to end up having no actual product being produced, and then also you have a contract on the line. That's, I think, the power of collective action. What we saw with the Screen Actors the Writers Guild of America and SAG also, it's another example of this. So yeah, I love that question. And I think fundamentally the message is the same. Is we need to be thinking critically about this and figuring out how we can speak up when the time's right.
I mean, I think that is the approach. And at the end of the day, what it says, corporations are made up of people. At the end of the day, there are people making those decisions, and people are incredibly susceptible to societal pressures and norms. If you stop getting invited to dinner parties, like that is actually an incredibly effective tool to stop doing what you're doing when people become social pariahs. And so people walking out for not saying, like, not working on technology, I've seen that work at corporations before, where you say, like, we're not going to do that. And at the end of the day, like, managers only have so much power, as much as it is. And like, if the smart people aren't going to be building the bad thing, like at a certain point, you just put down your pen and you walk away. And smart people will find, and I hope and believe that smart people will find other ways to put food on the table, and you can go and do and work on other things. And having ethical standards, having these conversations is the most important thing to set that stage.
I maybe at this point don't have that much to add, but I'll add maybe an anecdote which speaks to sort of this idea that people need, people and actions that people take, especially collectively, but also individually can matter. And actually, Tamina and I were talking about this before. I teach a privacy class where I have computer science students, but I also bring in students from other disciplines on purpose, because my main message is sort of, this is not just a technology issue. It's technology, it's economics, it's culture, it's history, it's political. And one of my students in that class, when she graduated, went on to this engineering internship program at Google that Tamid mentioned. And maybe a year later, she emailed me and she said, I've been here at Google now, and I sort of, this was what I was training for, but I've realized, thanks to your class, I want to be a lawyer. Because I really care deeply about privacy, and I think that at this point I can make a larger impact by sort of moving my energy into sort of a more policy-oriented space. And I said, we will be very sad to lose you in the engineering side of the house, but it's really valuable to have engineering-informed people on the legal side, and people that have, again, sort of thought critically about the different roles that technology and policy and education and other aspects play. So I think collective action is important. I think, deep education and spaces for reflection and thinking are important. Yeah.
It's in the room. Yeah, go ahead.
So, going beyond the human aspect, I've listened to some interviews recently with Yuval Noah Harari, who feels it's highly likely that AI will escape human control and become like HAL in 2001. I wonder what your thoughts are on that.
Personally, I think we're a long ways away from that. I don't think we know what makes consciousness, and what would get there to make something escape human control. We've actually seen this pattern a couple of times in AI previously. Actually, Eliza chatbot it like in the 60s down at MIT, where people are like, this thing is sentient. It is responding to me. It knows what we're saying. It's like, how is it even responding? And I get a decent number of those emails from people around the world in my current job. And the thing to kind of think about at the end of the day of like, all of this technology is like incredibly complex probability distributions and predictions. And like, yes, it might seem sentient. We're just getting really, really good at like fitting curves to data points. And for what makes sentience and consciousness, like that is a very interesting and compelling debate question. And like, but I don't think we're any closer to understanding that. now than previously, and I don't think the current technological path will get us there either.
Yeah, I really agree with that. And it might just be because, we're seeing how it works under the hood. But I think Duncan captured it well. It's just very, very good fitting of data. And I think it ties into what Rebecca is saying about that space for critical thinking. The thing that scares me is not the AI; it's the person behind the AI tool and what they want to do with it. Um, uh, yeah. So, but yeah, just generally agree.
Yeah, and I mean, I think, I do think there in the last few years, there really was a qualitative change in how well these systems work that make them seem so much closer than they were to being intelligent or generally intelligent. But I think those of us that were paying sort of more attention to the evolution of the technologies, like it wasn't that surprising. I think there is potential room for surprises in the future. I think I think one thing I've heard said that sticks with me is we're all worried about Terminator, and what we get is Roomba, right? And it took a lot of work to get the Roomba to work well. But we took this big step, and so I think I actually think this comes back to what I said earlier. What we even mean by intelligence will change. And I think there will be certain domains in which the tools really do feel intelligent. They feel like they behave as if they know what you're thinking before you even think it. They give you what you want or something useful that you didn't even know you want. And so some of the things we may fear when we have these fears, like that it'll be used in military applications, will happen and do need to be thought about. And is there some probability that, we'll have sort of this runaway AI that we can't stop? Perhaps. But I think there's a lot more to worry about along the way and more chances to maybe even get things right along the way as well.
Pandemic was recent enough that it's passion for the people out there on Zoom. What we got?
Sure. Okay, we have another David, different David. This is David Moo, who's joining us, I believe, from New York, and I think David's sister is here somewhere. So thank you, Lauren. The Moo family is representing tonight. If composition in writing or music or visual art is now going to become an AI collaborative process, the leaning in referred to by the panel. A, are we redefining the creative process? B, will we lose the ability to create alone, facing down the psychic void? And C, do we become at best highly trained creative editors rather than creators per se?
I'd like to think there's room for both, and that, both as creators and as consumers of things that have been created, there will be preferences on both sides. There are people that still have vinyl records, but most of us are happy to listen on our iPhones. But it's a challenge. I mean, I think for the creators, the ability to make a living gets much harder.
Yeah, I think it ties into what kind of so just the more broadly, are we redefining the creative process a little bit? Yeah, like I think as Duncan and Rebecca have both said, like you can't like ignore the tool altogether. In Rebecca's example, like we're not teaching people to add using the slide rule. We're not saying like there's calculator doesn't exist, like digital calculator out the window. But instead, we want to teach people to be able to think critically about the things, and then the tool is an add-on. And so I think in some ways, the creative process will be redefined, and it's up to us to figure out like what is the role of critical thinking and creativity in that process. For example, let's say like I wanted to generate, let's say I wanted to create a painting. I used the word generate, and like actually paint it, right? But I was stuck on ideas. Like maybe I can actually talk with a chatbot and be like, oh, like I'm like feeling this way and I'm looking for painting ideas. What do you have? And then work off of that. That seems like a perfectly like okay process. And that's something new that wasn't there before. But at the end of the day, like it's sort of, I think, up to us as people and as a society to figure out like how exactly like that all fits in. And I definitely don't want to see a world where we all, like all of our jobs end up becoming something like take the output of something that's artificially generated and then tweak it and then ship it out. Yeah, but definitely a lot of, like we can shape it so that the room for the creator is still there.
I would say the biggest risk is something that we've actually seen previously, which is the problem of just the attention economy in phones. And this is not so much something different as something that's a continuation of making it like asking a model to come up with something is a lot easier than actually doing the hard work of sitting down in a room with a pen and paper and like trying to think critically. Like that is just hard. And this makes it even easier to take the shortcut of ask for something versus type it into Google versus, oh, I could do some hard work or I could look at like cat photos on the internet. And so that's the challenge at the same time. So I think that's the risk and something I don't have a solution for other than to be conscious of and be wary of for students and everyone else. And, I try to fight back as much as I can. It's really hard to. I'll also cop to saying like, I actually don't mind editing. Like I find coming up with first drafts incredibly hard. I find writing outlines easy and I find editing relatively easy. So for the pieces of work that I don't particularly care about, like it saves me a lot of time and a lot of pain and stress of like coming up with those both first drafts as well as editing. So it's changing process and it's some things not awful, but I think they're also, I hope and want there to be room for human creativity in the long term. I believe there will be.
Question. I see we.
I'll stand up so I can be heard.
Yeah.
Something that hasn't been talked about is the equivalent of fact checking. Right now, we have people in newspapers who fact check current events, but there's no, in my knowledge, no equivalent fact checker for an artifact, especially, for example, animation with images and voice that are all gathered off of data that's available on the internet and then resurfaced and modified so that you can create a false image of someone and promulgate it. And we don't have the equivalent, in my understanding, we don't have the equivalent of a fact checker to tell us when such an artifact is a fake. And I think that our society is at enormous risk of being manipulated because of that. I want to know, am I off base or is there such a thing as a fact checker?
I totally agree. I think it's a huge risk. I mean, we've already seen with lesser technologies that people are susceptible to misinformation and disinformation and that will be weaponized. One of the, I think there's sort of two challenges there. One is to develop methods that can, well, maybe three, reliably detect machine-generated content or manipulations of, sort of what are considered allowable manipulations, like a Photoshop, to clean up an image versus sensitive, let's call it, manipulations that are intended to deceive in some way. So I think we don't have great methods for doing that. I think even if we had those methods, we don't know sort of how to operationalize that and turn it into something that helps people judge what they are seeing and consuming and make the right conclusions. I think there is potentially a role for if we get the tool, you know, if we have the capabilities to detect, or sorry, I think there's a role for legislation or policy-based solutions in some ways, either by having at least sort of the compliance systems build in some representation, some metadata about ways in which an image was created or changed, or how it was modified. But I think we don't have an end-to-end solution yet, and no one piece of that is yet going to do that. I think it's an area, you know, like as an academic, I'm like, that's a great research area, because I think there's a lot needed. But I think it is a challenge, and I think it's already a challenge. Like, it was already a challenge just you know, with Wikipedia. And so these are conversations we've had, but there was just this big jump in capabilities of the tools, and we hadn't even caught up to where we were before.
Yeah, I think Rebecca captured pretty much all of my thoughts on this, so I really agree. Yeah, just want to echo the point. Like, it's not a new problem. It's more that the way in which you can manipulate things now has become significantly easier than they were before. And I also think, like, you know, this speaks a little bit to how these technologies are being developed. When you create a space where multiple corporations, let's say, are competing with each other to be first to market, to try to make this technology universally accessible without actually putting in the time to work with, like, legislators, folks like Duncan, to actually, like, think through, like okay, like, what is the end impact it's going to have on people, and let's start, like, thinking about how do we actually roll this out in a much safer way. We end up in this world where we're having to catch up, and it needs to be reversed. Yeah.
I'll add two things. Like, there's no fact checker that exists. It is an active area of research that people are looking at it, so it's a very interesting question. There are also things that you can do today. So there's been some really interesting work on data poisoning, which is both attack vector, as well as there's a researcher out of University of Chicago who's made two tools, Fox and Nightshade, where you can take an image and you can make that image be from Barack Obama to pickup. And, like, if you train any model on that poisoned image, it will think pickup, even though to any human it will still look like Barack Obama, like, very small. And those are free, publicly accessible tools that anyone can use, install on your phone, whatever. So there are ways that we even can kind of fight back now. But yeah, there are no solutions yet. Fox, Fawkes, and
die.
Yes, and Nightshade is the other. So,
well, I've taken away that, and I've taken away from you, Duncan, when you are next in San Francisco, just get in the Waymo, you'll be fine. On that note, thank you very much. So we move to the next stage.
Yes. Yeah. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, folks on Zoom. And their chef and kitchen team have prepared a lovely array of light bites behind you. So the bar is back open. Folks on Zoom, we hope you'll join us in person sometime soon. And enjoy, everyone. Thank you.